Hi everyone, my name is Ian McGarvey, and today we are going to talk about the significance of single subject research as it relates to my future dissertation topic. So first, a little bit about myself. I am a regional clinical director at an autism center based out of Michigan called Centria. I've been with that company for about 4 years in basically that same capacity. I was certified as a board certified behavior analyst in May of 2013. I've been in the field of ABA since 2011. As you can see, I went to Ball State University, which is located in Muncie, Indiana. Played football there. It's where I also did my graduate work in applied behavior analysis. A couple other pictures you see there are me with Dr. Megan Miller, co-author of The 7 Steps to Instructional Control, as well as with Dr. Greg Hanley. So first, let's talk about the different kinds of experimental research designs. And we're going to break experimental designs up into two main groups: group comparisons and single subject designs. Group comparisons, as you can guess, means that we are evaluating the data of more than one individual, and we're comparing the effects of variables that occur within two subgroups. And those subgroups are between subjects or within subjects. Your between subjects research occurs when we have different groups of people test each variable or each test condition, if you will. So for example, oftentimes if we have two variables that we are testing, we might break that up into 4 groups and have 4 different groups of participants. With a within subjects research, a within subjects group comparison, every participant is going to test every single test condition. Then we have, single subject design. And as you can guess from the name, single subject refers to we are measuring the data of one individual, or we're measuring the data of one group as a whole. And today, we're specifically going to get into single subject research. Before we do that, let's talk about the similarities and differences of group comparison versus single subject research. Some similarities. Both obviously are quantitative, and specifically we're talking about experimental research. But to make it experimental, we have to have quantitative data. We also, in both types of research, are looking for what we call causal relationships. We are looking to see whether or not one variable specifically influences change in another variable. And we are looking to make sure that we control the environment so that only if there's change in the dependent variable, that the independent variable is the only reason that change could have occurred. And we do so by trying to control for what we call extraneous variables, or variables in the environment that could potentially have an influence on the dependent variable changing. To contrast the two, when looking at group comparison versus single subject design, how we analyze the data is done much differently. In group comparison, we use what's called statistical analysis. So we are looking at the numbers themselves. We're looking at the data. We're looking at the numbers that the dependent variable produces and determining from that whether or not there is a statistical significance, if you will. With single subject design, we're going to use what we call visual analysis or visual inspection. We are going to use our 2 eyes that have been given to us, and we're going to use those eyes to look at the data via a graph and determine if there is a visual representation of what we call a functional relation, or a relationship between the independent and dependent variable. We also, another way that single subject and group design also differ are between in how they measure external validity. With group designs, the more people you have in your study, the more generalizable, if you will, we would say that the data might be. So the more people we have within the sample that we're using, the more likely it is that the data represents a larger population outside of the study. Within single subject design, we are able to provide more external validity of the research we're doing by continuing to replicate the findings of what we find. So oftentimes in single subject design, we may not actually be researching something that's brand new. We may actually be furthering the research of something that's already been done. And that helps provide external validity for that topic. So again, today talking more specifically about single subject design and its importance in my dissertation topic. So there are four main types of single subject design: reversal and withdrawal, alternating treatments, multiple baseline, and changing criterion. We're going to talk specifically about alternating treatments and multiple baseline, but just a little background on the other two. Reversal withdrawal is considered the gold standard of applied behavior analysis research or single subject design. And it involves implementing a baseline phase. And once we receive stable data in that baseline phase, we implement the intervention. Once we see the intervention have success and reach stable data, we do what's called a reversal or withdrawal of that intervention. We return back to baseline. And then once we've got stable data back again in baseline, we return the intervention back in place, oftentimes called an ABAB design. Within all of these designs, each design is going to be used to display a functional relation differently. And in a reversal design, when we can remove the intervention and return to baseline to baseline data, if you will, as well as then re-implement the intervention and see the intervention change the behavior again, we then are able to determine that a functional relation has occurred. With changing criterion design, this is a design that's often used with behaviors that are already in a person's repertoire. We're looking to either increase or decrease the rate that those behaviors might be occurring. So in doing so, again, we achieve a stable baseline. And then once we have done so, we change the criteria of what the responding should be for that behavior. And as we continue to see the behavior adapt, if you will, to the changing criterion, we continue to change that criteria. And in any changing criterion design, we display a functional relation by being able to not only continuously change the criterion in the direction of change we want to see, but also reversing the criteria and going back in a backwards fashion, if you will, and then going back forward. The two types of designs we're going to focus on today, though, we'll talk about here in a second. So the current research that we're looking at, the current topic I'm looking at studying is comparing the effects of two different teaching procedures, training Manding for children with autism, something that I have just come into contact personally in my work as a board-certified behavior analyst. I see lots of different ways that people are trying to prompt initial Manding in children with autism. It's an area where we definitely can further our research and make MAND training more efficient for our learners with autism. And again, we will be using a combination of the alternating treatments design and the multiple baseline design, which in turn helps us determine a strong functional relationship by using two different designs. So first, let's talk about the multiple baseline design. Specifically, we're going to talk about the multiple baseline design across participants. So we're going to compare data. We're going to use replication to show a functional relationship within the multiple baseline design. So some things that I'll point out here. So typically in your multiple baseline design, again, you're going to achieve steady baseline before you implement your intervention. Some flaws that I can definitely point out from the data that I've used here. A gold standard right now in single subject design is we typically want at least 5 stable baseline data points. And you can see here in this graph, there are not 5. So definitely something that I would change about the graph or the design that this researcher used. I would also point out that we like to use a different number of baseline data points just to show that the behavior wouldn't change had someone just done 1 extra or 2 extra baseline data points. So every baseline in a multiple baseline design is going to have a different number of data points. We're also going to make sure that when we implement the intervention, that the next baseline continues and in a stepwise fashion. So you'll often see within a multiple baseline design that there's only one intervention going on at a time, which clearly also is not happening here. And you see when you draw your phase change lines, you see what we would call a stepwise fashion going through the different interventions. Next, alternating treatments design. So again, looking for a stable baseline. Once we do so, we're then going to implement 2 or more alternating treatments in a rapid fashion. And so as you can see from the graph, you've got 2 different treatments being implemented here, and you can see that the interventions are not being implemented on the same days, if you will, and you can see that the data points then between the 2 different interventions are not connected. In an alternating treatments design, we are looking to see whether or not the 2 lines, one drawn through the alternating treatments design data for each intervention. We're looking to see whether or not there is a clear space between the two, and minimal, if none at all, no intersection between the two data lines. And as you can see from the graph here, we've got two lines of data where the data points clearly are not touching. One comment I would make is that treatment B, although showing to be more effective, is starting to trend back towards baseline data, which would mean that we probably want to continue to implement intervention until we see that the data is stable and not heading back towards the other data line. So we're going to do an alternating treatments design combined with a multiple baseline design across participants. So we're talking about, a single subject design on steroids here. So as you can see, some of the things that I pointed out in some of the other designs as flaws, you can see have been fixed in this design. So you can see each of the baseline phases have different number of data points. So this shows that regardless of how long we decide to extend baseline, that the data is not going to change. And you can see that intervention is not started for the next participant until, pardon my language, that's not true. They did not wait for stable intervention data before they implemented the second student. But in an alternating treatments design, you really don't have to wait for stable data. So I guess I contradict myself by saying what I said. So let's talk about the previous literature, for the current research. So there's 3 different articles that I'm going to highlight, and each article I'm going to highlight has its own data. And each of the research articles that I'm going to briefly touch on use the alternating treatments combination with multiple baseline designs. So you can see here, we have 2 participants. They were using 2 different main training procedures, similar to what I would be doing. You can see that from the data, there was not a clear functional relation between the 2 data points for one of the participants. Therefore, they were unable to say that their results showed that the one intervention was more successful than the other. Next one, similar here. You got baseline data, one's longer than the other. Then the interventions are implemented. Again, for both participants in this study, you see trends that are both continuing in a positive way. Therefore, they could not show that one intervention was more successful than the other. And finally, last article by Jeanette Harris and Del Molino in 2008. Same thing here. You can see that in all 3 of the participants, none of the lines cross with each client in the intervention phases. So they were unable to determine that one of the procedures was more effective than the other. So of course, at this point, you might say, Ian, you've got 3 research studies here over the last 12 or 13 years that have used the design that you plan to use with your topic, and none of them have been successful in showing a functional relation between the variables. And does that cause any concern for you choosing to use this design in your study? And the answer is definitely no. There's no evidence to show that the designs themselves were cause for the variability in data. And to me, it just shows that there is a further gap in the research, and this research needs to continue. And we need to figure out why these researchers are not finding the results that they likely are intending to see by seeing that one procedure is more effective than the other. So let's talk about the advantages of the use of this design, as well as the ethics behind the use of this design. So first and foremost, by not having to reverse our data or withdraw an intervention, we minimize risk for the population that this is intended for. This is a vulnerable population for multiple reasons. Both having children as well as children who have special needs who aren't able to assent for themselves makes them a vulnerable population. But by not having to withdraw or reverse treatment, we increase the safety and the social validity potentially for the study. By using the alternating treatments design, we are able to, pretty quickly do a comparison of the 2 interventions, and you could potentially see pretty quick success without having to have quote unquote stable data. And finally, by including a multiple baseline design, the more participants we use, the more we're able to replicate findings, the stronger our external validity will be following the study. And obviously that's contingent upon the study showing that one of the interventions is more effective for all of the clients over the other, or over the participants, excuse me. So that is my presentation on single subject design as it pertains to my dissertation study. It's been a great semester. Thank you both Dr. Davis and Dr. Blair for your weekly sessions. It's definitely helped and furthered my education as a board certified behavior analyst, specifically to single subject design. Thank you.